welcome to this video. In this video we're going to start work on the fuel system, in particular the fuel tank. When I bought my Europa, there was a replacement tank in it made out of stainless steel, just a square box, and it didn't have any resemblance to an original tank at all. So we're going to replace that, and we're going to replace that by making our own tanks, and we're going to use the design of an original tank, but we're going to make this out of aluminium. Because I don't have an original tank, I had to rely on some people to get some dimensions, and one of the people that helped me was Steve Ferris. He sent me this drawing of an original tank with some dimensions, so I can use those dimensions to make the design of the new tank. And what we're going to start off with is we're going to build a wooden buck to form the aluminium for the new tanks, and this is some MDF, and I've drawn on some outlines of the side-on view of the tank, and I'm going to cut these out so we can make a buck to form the aluminium. So I've drawn out 5 shapes. I'm going to use a jigsaw to cut them out, and then we're going to shape them so they're all the same. Then we're going to start building the buck. This is the tank that came out of the car. This isn't an original one. As you can see, it's a fabricated tank. It's made out of stainless steel and it's quite heavy, and it doesn't really resemble an original tank at all. This is a wooden buck that I made out of some MDF based on the dimensions that I was able to gather from some fellow S1 owners. And this is the first tank that I made. This is the right hand side tank, and we're going to make the left hand side tank together. So we're going to with a dual fuel tank setup, like there was an original option back in the day, to get some more fuel capacity. So this is the first tank that I made, so I'm going to quickly show you around it so you have an idea of what we're going to build. So it's made out of one continuous sheet all around, folded around the buck, and then the two sides are welded in separately. Everything is made with AN fittings. This is just a cap that's on there. So on the bottom you can see the seam where the two halves join together. Then we have a drain to drain the fuel if necessary, if you want to clean the tanks out. Then there are 4 solid pieces of aluminium in there, which have a thread cut in them to mount a fuel tank. On top we have the fuel filler neck. It says a bead around there so the hose won't slip off. Then there's a rollover valve, so this is to vent the fumes, and there's a little ball in there. Should the car turn upside down, the fuel won't spill out. This is a welded in flange for a new type of fuel sender. This is the aluminium sheet that will make up the outside shell of the fuel tank. I measured the circumference of the buck and I cut the aluminium sheet to size. This is 1080 aluminium, so it's really soft and it's quite easy to bend. It won't crack or break. First thing I need to do is to fold 2 lips on either side of the sheet, so when they're joined together I can clamp it to weld. I've scribed a line on there which I want to have the fold there, and then I've clamped it between 2 pieces of wood. Now we're just going to fold this edge over using a nylon hammer so we don't mar the aluminium. I've cut out one of the sides, just used the same aluminium as before. You can see the main panel of the side and then the 4 lips that will be folded over to 90 degrees, and then these can be welded in. So I'm just going to fold them over just as I did with the lips on the previous piece. Just clamp it between 2 pieces of wood and then use a hammer to fold them over. trimmed both sides to fit. This one I've already clamped in there, and I've added a -6 fitting to siphon the fuel out. The main structure of the fuel tank has been welded on this seam, and as you can see, this is the inside where the fitting has been welded to the side piece. I already bent up a piece of aluminium tube to act as a pickup. That I'll weld onto there. Then we have a fuel pickup, so it rests on the bottom, but the tube has been cut at an angle, so a lot of fuel can be sucked in. I'm not using a sock filter on the pickup, but I'm using double fuel filters, so one at the pump and one after the pump. So the next thing to do is to weld on the pickup tube to the fitting. Then we'll need to weld the side piece to the main structure of the tank. Both sides have been added to the main piece of the tank. I started off with just tacking the flanges in place. These two flanges are still tacked. These have already been welded. All of the flanges on the back side have been welded as well. Now I'm going to finish off welding the flanges on the other side. Then we're going to let it cool for a bit, and then we have to start with the tricky part, and that is welding the corners. So I'll show you on the finished tank how that will look. So as you can see, it's quite tricky. You have to weld alongside the flange, weld in the corners, and then alongside the flange, and try not to get any pinholes, because otherwise it will leak, because I have tested it. So it's a bit tricky. The first two are difficult. Once I get the hang of it again, it'll be quite easy. While the tank itself is cooling, we can cut a piece of 50mm in diameter aluminium tubing to use as a filler neck. So I've already made sure that this edge is completely straight and smooth. This is a 12cm length, so I'm just going to cut along this tape line with a sawzall, and then I'll finish it with some hand files and some sandpaper. And I've drawn a bit on one end with a Sharpie, and now we're going to anneal this piece so that we can make a bead on this end of the tube. We're just mounted in the vise. Then I'm just going to use a small blowtorch just to heat it up. Once that the Sharpie will burn off, that it's already the exact temperature to anneal it. So then we're going to let it cool down, and then we can put a bead on this end. So this is the tube with this side annealed. You've already seen my my bead roller as I've used on the cooling pipes. I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on the roller. So we now have a nice bead on the end, which will prevent the filler hose to drop off. There's a little bit of discoloration, but I'll polish it a bit and then it'll be fine. The fuel tank is completely welded up, so it will hold fluid at the moment. However, there aren't any provisions for filling it, draining it or mounting it, so we're going to start off with that. This is the bottom of the fuel tank. The original tanks would have had two steel studs going out the bottom, about 2 inches long, which would have gone through the fiberglass floor. That will be used to mount it. However, that's not so sturdy, and it's also quite prone to cracking, so we're going to use a different option. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drill 4 holes in the bottom of the fuel tank. For these are blind ending threaded bungs, so I will weld these in, and then I can thread in some threaded rods to bolt down the fuel tank, and we'll do it on all 4 corners, which will make sure that it's quite sturdy and it won't be able to move in any direction. To drain the fuel tank, we'll also add a drain in the bottom. So this is also a threaded bung that will be welded in the bottom of the fuel tank with an aluminium plug with an O-ring on, which can thread in there. So I'll drill all of the holes, mock it up, and then we're going to weld it. The holes have been drilled, so now you can fit all the bungs. Like this. Now I can start welding them on. I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished, and we'll fit the plug and also the parts that I'm going to use to mount the tank. Forgot to mention that I'm threading in a bolt in the blind bungs because there's a very small edge to weld to, and I don't want any of the welding metal to go into the threaded part so that the bolts won't fit. So these are steel bolts that are threaded into the bungs, and this will prevent any aluminium to drain into the threads. So while I'm welding these small ones up, I'm having a steel bolt in there. On the big one it's not necessary because there's a very big edge to weld to. It's just on these small parts. It's better to prevent this than having to deal with it afterwards. So all of the aluminium inserts have been welded in on the bottom. As you can see, there are 4 feet to mount it, and then 1 for the drain. So this is the aluminium plug for the drain. It also has an O-ring. Now to mount the fuel tank we could just use some threaded rod, but I've been using this. So these are rubber dampers with threaded studs on the end. Like this, and in the series 1 there's a fiberglass cradle molded into the body where it will support the complete bottom and the sides a little bit, so we can just drill holes into the cradle and then bolt it down using these rubbers, and hopefully this will provide a little bit of dampening just to make sure that the aluminium won't crack. This is the top of the fuel tank. I've already made 1 hole for the venting tube, so that will go here. Then we need another hole to add the filler neck. I've already marked it, so it's a 2-inch diameter hole. We're just going to use a hole saw to make it. Going to use a little bit of WD-40 to lubricate it, but we start by drilling. now we know where the hole is going to be, so we can add a little bit of lubrication. Okay. So we have quite a clean hole. It needs a little bit of finishing because of the rough edges. Then we can try to position the filler neck on what angle we do want it. Now we'll be welding it on. So we've already welded in this insert, and I've tacked the filler neck only on this point because I can angle it more or less that way, and to make sure that it's 90 degrees straight in that direction. This one has an angle of about 6 degrees towards the outside. I've already fitted this one in the car, and it could have been a little bit more, but it's not that big of a deal. Just a bit less. So now I'm going to make sure that this is the same as that one. I could have made this a bit bigger because it would fit a bit easier, but I'm a sucker for symmetry, so I'm going to do this one exactly the same as that one. So it's angled, I think, 6 degrees towards the outside. I've made sure that it's 90 degrees in both these corners so that it's straight in that direction. So now I can just weld around this. It has a stick out of about 11 centimeters more or less, so it's exactly the same in both fuel tanks. So now everything's welded on the fuel tank. As you can see, my welding has improved quite a bit since I first started, especially on the aluminium. Everything's welded on. This insert is for a vent valve, for a fuel vent. So when you're filling, air has to escape to replace the volume for the fuel that's coming in. So this is a valve. This has a -6 fitting on the end. What it's doing is this has a small ball in it. So it's called a rollover valve. So should the car accidentally turn upside down in an accident, fuel won't be able to leak from the vent, so the ball will close the vent, and then fuel won't be able to drain from the fuel tank. All of these fittings and the inserts are from Torx, torx.co.uk. This is quite nifty, so it's outbuilt, so it has been milled from aluminium. It has a recess for an O-ring that will seal into the insert, so you can just tighten it. And now a -6 fitting with a hose will go to the outside of the car, so the fuel will be able to vent. All of the inserts are from Torx except the blind bobbins for the mounting of the fuel tanks. I bought those from Merlin Motorsport, as well as the VDO sender adapter to weld on the fuel tank. That's on the other tank. I already got that from Merlin Motorsports as well. So I'll show you both of the tanks side by side, then you can see what they look like. This is how the fuel tanks will be mounted in the car. So this is the right hand tank, this is the left hand tank, and this one is exactly a mirror image of the other one, except for this. So this is the plate that I was talking about. So it's a round aluminium CNC'd plate with mounting holes for a VDO style fuel sender. So I'm not using the original fuel sender with the lever arm, but I'm using a different type. This is the fuel sender, so it doesn't have any moving parts, which means that I can fill the fuel tanks with anti-slosh foam or something else if I should want to, and this is actually from a boat, but it uses the video style plate to mount it. And the plate is also threaded, so I can just bolt this on. There's a seal that needs to go in between, so I can bolt this on, and it's 40 centimeters in length, so it should reach just about the bottom of the fuel tank. And then there's a plate to cover the electrical items that can click on. For the rest, the fuel tank is exactly the same, so it both has a rollover valve, it also has the same means of mounting it, and they both have a drain to drain the fuel tanks if I should want to. So I've done a little bit of pressure testing. I've added a nipple on top and I've added some pressure to it to check for leaks with soapy water. Everything checked out okay. The only thing that I changed to the fuel tanks is that I've added a return to both of the fuel tanks, so it's a -6 fitting, so I can use my fuel injection setup to return to the fuel tanks. So this is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and you can also visit my blog, and I hope I see you next time. Goodbye.